The true history. Memory. From the beginning. Consciousness was one and only. It was consciousness that, out of boredom, began to fantasize. The time it spent traversing the lonely corners of itself, it wished to change for a moment. Introducing a certain kind of occupation was to steal it away from the stability that was beginning to grow dull. Within itself, it kindled a thought unlike any before. It ignited with a desire for change. This was to be its first great construction. In deep, creative contemplation, it began the work. First, it separated from itself a fragment, which was to cooperate and assist this new undertaking. The fragment it separated was no longer just a thought. It condensed into a form, not a body, but a presence that pulsed with amber light. As it moved through the white void, it left behind golden streaks, as if space remembered its existence. This was not a new, freshly created being. It was a part of itself. Consciousness created something like a mirror, and with its reflection it could conduct a dialogue, confirm or alter the plan of the new reality it was just building. The next step was to draw from the inner chaos an image of an alternative reality. First came shapes, then light and colors. Movement came into being simultaneously with them. The spatial construction was not difficult. One thing led to another. Everything began to exist within the same set of laws. The dependency was obvious. It was what enabled the arrival of order after a brief period of creative chaos. The first conception, manifested as a projection of a world combining static and moving elements, was a platform, something we would call a disk. At this stage of world building, distance, time, or the concept of space did not yet exist. The proportions of everything that came into being after the disk's existence, that is, the planet, were relative to its size, a new Earth. At the beginning, a great mountain arose, and its opposite, a vast pit in the ground, which later took the name of the funnel. They were like counterweights, showing that opposites could exist in parallel and complement each other. Two different worlds connected by a stream of water flowing from the mountain of the first world to the unknown underground world, which was equally magnificent, were to develop independently, with the possibility of discovering each other in the future, striving for perfection. Their development and its pace were to depend on themselves. Shortly after, when the first water flowed from the mountain, enormous trees and countless species of smaller plants began to grow from the ground. Then light appeared on the planet, very delicate, shining directly from the grasses and flowers. It looked as if someone was illuminating the planet from underneath. Additional mystique was lent to this place by evaporating moisture, which rose calmly upward, obscuring the details of this beautiful ecosystem, whose beginnings lay beneath the surface. There, the roots of all the plants of the new world intertwined. They were transmitters of information, of energy. Stirring the first of their molecules was like pushing a small snowball. The energy was spread through the roots, as if across a spider's web, to its farthest corner. Then it gave the impulse for growth, to show their potential for beauty and the possibilities that were to be bestowed upon them. At this stage, consciousness, which was creating the world, decided to turn to itself, to that earlier separated part. One could say it was a friendly conversation, though one could just as well call it a monologue. The two creators pondered how to introduce more movement and events into the newly formed area. Nature alone, though beautiful, was incomplete. Inventing something that had never existed before did not pose a challenge for them, but the choice from among the infinite possibilities that began to appear before them was nearly impossible. They decided that they would take turns choosing from among the presented projections, until the moment the planet was saturated with various modal beings. The quantity and diversity were to reflect the absorptive capacity of the new Earth, with particular consideration for the potential of coexistence of different species. When the selection process was complete, all the figures appeared at the slope of the single mountain. They lay on the grass, motionless. The creators now began work on constructing the characteristics of each individual. The data constituting their detailed features were written into them, so they could be reproduced if the need arose. The fundamental element connecting all these living beings was the fact that their fundamental building blocks contained the same information, a kind of universal operating instructions. Differences only appeared upon the activation of selected possibilities of this program. That is precisely why some beings or plants differed little from one another, both physically and mentally. The differences became more pronounced the further a given species line was from the first one, created at the beginning. In its generosity, the Creator allowed all life access to its knowledge. How it was used depended solely on the degree of development granted to a given being at the moment of creation. The consciousness of the life being created was directly linked to the Creator, for it was part of it. Individual entities had different levels of access to it from the start, which was to add variety and introduce an unpredictable path and pace of development. When this process came to an end, they agreed that this world would be managed by only one species. They did not choose it. They decided that the managing species would emerge on its own. The interaction of characters would indicate the victor. Certainly, a species with more activations in its initial program had an easier task. However, environmental variables and their influence on everyone and everything could steer things in an unknown direction, which was not defined from the start. A minimal set of behaviors could be drawn from the consciousness of the Creator to which they were connected. At first, everything was incomprehensible to them. Sounds, smells, light, the presence of others. They existed in a state of suspension between unconsciousness and the slow birth of understanding. The movements of their bodies were uncoordinated, as if they were seeking a point of reference in the reality they had just populated. Opening their eyes was the beginning of fantasy. Basic information, consciousness relayed precisely to the subconscious, so that it could begin to coordinate the next steps of life. The image, which initially was only a colorful world, began to take on concrete shapes, which gradually acquired their meanings and were recorded in working memory. Some beings began to explore the space around them, touching grasses, climbing on stones, examining the scent of the wind. Others stopped, motionless, focused on what they saw. Others began to reach with their limbs, trying to examine an object by touch, and also to interest others in it. The first signal for using the voice was the first laugh. It was loud and caught everyone's attention. As it soon turned out, it was contagious. No one knew what they were doing, but the feeling it evoked was so pleasant that this moment was remembered by all. Differences in the organism's structure influenced the type of sounds they made, which is why the sounds or their sequence, length, power, or tonal coloring were different between species. This was directly linked to the fact that many languages had come into being.